Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can scale and grow. And today's guest is Byron McFarland. Hi, Byron.
Hi, Adi.
How are you?
I am well.
Good. Well, I'm sure you will agree that businesses need systems in order to scale and grow.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We encourage them.
For sure. And, I am so excited about our conversation today because we're going to talk about a subject that I hear a lot of questions about, which basically we're going to figure out a system on how you can transfer the business to an employee or to basically an employee or group of employees. Because I interviewed many business brokers on this, on my podcast, and they gave amazing advice about how to sell the business. But we are talking about transferring the ownership internally, which is definitely a subject that I'm sure our listeners are going to be very interested in. But before we go into it, I definitely would like to introduce you properly. So you are an enthusiastic you do fly fishing, right? I mean, you love fly fishing.
I love to go fishing
trout.
Using a fly rod. Yes.
That's right.
Yep.
But most of it, that's what you're here, is you help guide entrepreneurs in their businesses. And we're going to talk about how you do that.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And one thing that I like to do at the beginning of every podcast is give a big shout out to the person that introduced me to my amazing guest. And in this case, it is John Land. So thank you, John, for doing that. And I will put the episode I did with John Land. It was a fantastic episode where he gave amazing advice on how to scale a business, how he has done it himself, and how he has helped his clients do that. And now he helps them also through automating the system. So definitely listen to that episode as well. And I think we should also give a shout out to Vern Harnish, that we actually both know. You met him at a workshop last week, and I interviewed him together with John Corcoran and Jeremy Weiss from Rise 25 and other EO members. And we interviewed him about his new book, Scale Up Compensation, which is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. So
I just read it.
Right. Isn't it amazing? I mean, it definitely has like very specific action items that businesses in different sizes can take in order to actually know how to compensate and how to retain talent, right? Because it's the compensation and everything that goes around it. So absolutely recommend that book. Great. Okay. So Byron, I introduced you a little bit and a few sentences here, but why don't you give us a little bit more of a thorough introduction of who you are and what you do before we go into our conversation about how to transfer the business to like successful, basically best practices on how to transfer the business to the management team.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to your audience today. So we provide guidance to owner operators. So all of our clients are both the owner and probably the senior leader of the organization. We don't have a portfolio of private equity companies. So all of our clients they're leading and owning their businesses and looking at some point to transfer the control of that business to the people that help them create that value. And in the process of doing that transfer, it's helpful to have a guide who can work with the owner and the management team to safely navigate all of what we call the gaps, the blind spots, and the minefields of a transfer to management, so that when the transfer concludes, that the business is still growing, the customers are happy, the employees are engaged, and the new owners are feeling invigorated and not fearful, or there's not been any distrust created between the parties, the selling party and the buying party. And then when we're not doing that, we're helping the owners design equity compensation plans that will be used to retain the talent until the exit or to attract the talent that's needed to continue to grow the business value. So succession planning guidance and equity compensation guidance.
Wow, those are both amazing topics that I have a lot of questions about. But let's start with the internal transition. So what would make a business owner decide that they are going to actually sell the business to the management as opposed to selling to an external buyer?
Yeah, so why would an owner choose to sell to management versus an outsider? We find that probably the most common reason that they choose to sell to management is because somewhere along the line they may have made a promise where they shared with someone who was working alongside them an opportunity that at some point they'd be looking to transfer this company to the management team. Another reason that business owners might consider selling their company to the management team is because they would like to have a legacy that is intact. Because typically when you sell your company to outsiders, they would more than likely will change the name, incorporate the organization into the acquisition brand, and then no one will ever know that entity existed because it got folded into the new entity, and perhaps the owner's looking for some form of legacy that they can come to. And then the third is that the owner wants to control the timing of the process, because in a sale to outsiders, you really need to take advantage of timing. If there's market activity, then you would sell when there was market activity. But in a management transition, the owner gets to choose the timing and the timetable under which the transaction would occur. So they have more control of the process. The sacrifice in a transition to management, as opposed to selling to outsiders, in many cases could be value received. For example, selling to outsiders, if you're ready and you have a scaled business like Vern Harnish coaches, then clearly selling to outsiders provides way more potential wealth. But for those who are perhaps not enthusiastic about scaling, but have a business that they are enjoying success in, and now would like to perhaps relieve themselves of the day-to-day responsibility without going through the due diligence that's necessary in a sale to outsiders, management's an elegant alternative. You can structure the transition on your terms.
Okay, good. And I would like to ask you more questions about the terms, but can it be, have you encountered, or is it possible that even if you have a well-run business that's scaled, that you can still sell it internally if you have somebody there that is qualified and really knows the business? Because you scale the business, right? I mean, let's say you scale the business, you hired a general manager, the general manager is running the business, you as the owner are no longer involved in the business, but at some point, because of different life situations, maybe the owner passed away and then the family wants to sell it, right? Or and the general manager comes to the owner or to the to the family and say, hey, I want to buy the business, right? It can still happen that way, right?
Yes. So in the event of the death or total disability of the founder, quite often a sale to management would be a favored choice because they have the people in place, like you suggested, to scale. So the business operations wouldn't be interrupted. The culture would be sustained through the transition. The organization wouldn't go through a dramatic shift in terms of like the leadership. There's not going to be there's already been a disruption. There's a lot of anxiety around the death or disability. Selling to management might provide the necessary sense of security on the staff that everything's going to be fine, assuming that perhaps plans have been put in place in advance that would provide for the orderly disposition of the ownership interest. I would not recommend that a family rely on a just-in-time transaction with management in a contingency like death or permanent disability. So if the business owner would like to have a secure and orderly transition, they want to plan ahead in that case.
Good. And let's talk about that process. So when should that process start? Like how many years in advance before the actual transition would you recommend? Do you recommend to your clients or business owners in general that they will start looking at that?
I find that that the people that plan ahead for the disposition of their company are very rare, in that it's not a common characteristic in the human genome to be always planning ahead. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that are, I guess, spontaneous and make decisions as the problems come their way, and unless they are experiencing a problem, they're not looking to create a plan. So normally what happens is a person has experienced some trauma, either family or personally in their life, where, oh, I need to think about that. Maybe they were rolling through an intersection and a car zoomed by them that ran a red light, and they're like, holy cow, I haven't done anything. What would have happened if I'd have rolled, that car would have ran into me? So that is by and large the most common trigger for us for like planning ahead for the disposition of the company. If they are a planner and they are looking ahead, or even if they're age appropriate and haven't planned, then somewhere between 3 and 7 years is needed for the buyers to get ready to assume responsibility. If you haven't groomed anybody for succession, probably takes 2 or 3 years to get them in a position where they can play that role. Then you need to create a deal structure that results in the buyers ideally securing financing from a community bank. And that takes time through the creation of a creditworthiness of the buyer through relationship with the lender, or creation of resources to the buyer through incentive plans or the sale of outright ownership that would be ultimately need to be paid for using profits to service that debt. That all takes time. So best practice would be minimum 3 years, and ideally I would say 7 years in advance, to have a plan that would provide you with the highest cash payout. If you wait till the last minute, you can sell your company to your management team, and there's 2 avenues. One avenue would be, if it's small, you sell it and you go to a bank, or you're going to sell it to your management team, you go to a bank and you get an SBA backed loan, and all you need is 10 or 20% down, and the bank and the SBA will guarantee the balance if you qualify, and you can get up to, say, $5 million. The other is that you sell it on a note and you accept some money up front, and then you get installment payments over probably 7, or most commonly is 10 years is what we see, so that there's enough after-tax cash flow to service the principal and interest payment. Because most businesses sell on a multiple of earnings, and that multiple of earnings, when you use that to determine value, then what that does is that without any down payment, or very little down payment, which is normal, the normal down payment on a management buyout with no plan is less than 10%. So it takes 7 to 10 years to pay that off, unless the management takes over and really drives growth. So I'd say get in front of it if you can. Otherwise, the no plan is get 10% down and basically get 9 years of installment payments.
Okay, so those are basically the options. It's either you do it last minute that way, or you actually plan in advance. But my question is, like, when you plan in advance, okay, so let's say right now I'm planning, okay, in 7 years, I'm going to transfer my business or sell my business to my management team. Right now I have a great lead consultant. It doesn't, but they're employees. It doesn't mean that, and things happen, not necessarily because they are unhappy and are going to get a better deal, right? But it is something, something can happen to their health. Something can happen to their family circumstances. Their spouse got an amazing offer that they can't refuse and have to move to another state. Whatever it is, how can you plan ahead dealing with employees 7 years in advance, where maybe they were not going to be there 7 years from now?
So you presented, let's say, several scenarios that would represent blind spot risks. Risk of them dying, the risk of them leaving because they got another offer, some other risk in the family situation, et cetera. You got all these blind spot risks. So if you if you had a key employee that you wanted to lock into your organization to become your buyer, then you would anticipate that risk of defection and say, how much do I need to do now to make that person the primary income source in the family? So if there's an amazing offer on the spouse side, they're like, we got an amazing offer right where we're at. So there's a way to approach that specific contingency and prepare for it through understanding what's possible for that employee or that employee's family, and what would we need to do to provide a counterbalance to that offer to have them compelled to stay with the organization. If the key employee should die or become disabled, that's tragic. You can, though, provide, if, for example, in the structures that we create, that's an economic interest that the business owner has in that key employee that can be insured. And so if the key employee is on track to buy the company, and there's a transfer of value to the key employee through some sale, and we want to get that value back, and then we want to let's say reduce the business owner's reliance on the subsequent sale, which may be for less value, then we can insure that key employee for an amount that the business owner would like to get to offset the implications of that death, using life insurance if they chose to.
Okay.
The family circumstances that's life, and you just have to, if you transfer ownership, our guidance is create an environment that you can get that ownership back under any condition that would be adverse to you as the owner.
Interesting.
You know the repurchase price, and you feel that's fair, and you have terms of repurchase that are feasible so that you can make installment payments using cash flow as opposed to going in borrowing money or using your line of credit or drawing from your checking account out of retained earnings. So we anticipate all those contingencies, and that's the advantage of planning ahead, is that if you can't avoid things that are coming at you in life, but if they happen, what would you like to have happen next?
Okay, good. So definitely that's part of the process, is planning for those contingencies.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so walk me through the process that you take your clients through in order to prepare for the sale to the management team.
Okay, so we break it up into three broad categories, Adi. The first one is people, and then the second is property, and the third is commitments. And what we do on the people stage is we interview all the people that are going to be involved on the sell side, the owner's spouse, on the buy side, whoever the buying group is, if it's an individual or a group of individuals, we're interviewing them all. So on the sell side, what we're looking for is what are their observable concerns regarding the buyers? What have they observed that they would want us to be aware of as advisors, so that we can appropriately assess that risk and then design some response to it if that risk should become reality. And then we look at also on the seller side, what do you need in the way of resources from the business through profit taking, sale proceeds, and then other payment methods that we structure? What would you need in total in order for you to be financially independent once you transfer controlling interest? And then so when we do that, then we understand what the seller sees and what the seller needs. And then we go to on the buy side, and we try to understand from the buyer's perspective, what is their expectation? What has been promised to them? What is it? How does that promise then relate to this transition, so that we can navigate those expectations, so that we don't create any further misunderstandings or unnecessary conflict. Then we're looking at the parties inside the buying group, trying to understand their relationships, so we can determine whether or not there's any minefields we could be stepping in, because there's interpersonal conflict that could be experienced at the transition, because normally when you change ownership, that's when all those interpersonal conflicts become can be revealed through behaviors. And so once we've done all that, then we understand what the people are, where the people risk is. Then we go into the property and we do a valuation. We illustrate the value going forward based on the company's business plan. If they're using some form of business planning tool like EOS or Scale Map or Scaling Up or whatever one of those services, we'll port that forecast into our model and show valuation and then available earnings that can be distributed, which would be taken by the owner to reduce their reliance on the business at sale. And on the other side of the property, we're looking at business real estate. Is there a real estate lease that's in place that would provide continuity of income, mailbox money? And then we're looking at other investments that the business owner has. We're really trying to determine how reliant that business owner is going to be on the sale proceeds in order for them to become financially independent. Then we move from there into the commitments, which is any letters of credit, any lines of credit, any term loans, anything that is an obligation that is backed up by the business owner through a personal guarantee. We're understanding the nature of that guarantee and what it might take in order for the owner to get relief from that guarantee in the transition. It's key to get relief prior to, ideally, the transition or concurrent with the transition, because you don't want to sell something and then retain the risk of the contingent liability.
True.
So we're looking at that. We're looking at any agreements that have been put in place, shareholder agreements, which would be buy-sell or stock restriction agreements, any incentive plans that are in place. We understand what's the method of compensating and rewarding the management team, and how likely is that to influence their retention, their willingness to stay through the transition. And so once we have all that done, then we can see now where the risks are, and are there any gaps in management's skill ability? Are there any financial gaps in management's ability to buy this enterprise? Are there any valuation issues? Do they need to grow value in order for the owner to be financially independent? How does the business owner's reliance on the business influence the timing? Because we may not be able to get enough value out of the business for them to be independent. So we need to have them harvest distributions for a period of years and then add the sale proceeds to that to make them independent. And then what are they committed themselves to that we need to try and unwind for them so that they're not holding on to guarantee risks as they're transferring ownership to their management team. And that would be our process. And that would be when we deliver that assessment, it's all in the form of report. Here's what we think is possible for you to move forward in a transaction with your management team. And then we're looking for your head going up and down. Are we on track?
That's right.
If we're on track, then we're saying, all right, let's go to the next stage, which is let's start getting things done. And normally the first thing we do, Adi, is we address the risk that we have no control over, which is if something should happen to you or your buyer, you die, become disabled, or have some form of, if you had a divorce, we want to, and we're going to make you a partner, or you already are a partner, we want to make sure that we've got all the terms and conditions that provide for the orderly disposition of that interest and funding, if funding's needed, to make the transaction risk less to the.
And that's where also the contingencies and the risk limit factors that we talked about before come into play.
Yeah. So we nearly always start there because that's the place of greatest risk. That's the blind side that everybody's trying to avoid. I don't want to get hit by that left. That movie where blindside is what it was. The quarterback getting blindsided. Yeah. We don't want our quarterback, the business owner, to get blindsided.
Right. Good. So those are the steps that you take, right? So that will be. So do you also help when the transition is actually happening? Like with the transition itself, like what happens after the transition, right? I mean, the question, I guess, that come to mind is like, okay, so now let's say the management is now the owner, right? So it is or maybe it's one person, maybe it's not the group. So now from being a peer, now they become the boss or the owner. How does that affect the culture?
Well, what we've experienced is that the timing between the assessment, which would be where we're going through those people property commitment steps, and the actual change of control is 3 to 7 years.
Right.
And so over that period of time, the transference of responsibility to that person or those people created we saw this coming years ago. And there is no abrupt transition like there would be in a Scaled Outsiders. Everybody's already acclimated the new culture because we provide encouragement and guidance to our owner, the seller, to not delegate and elevate, but to offboard, like Michelle Hecken is teaching now, which would be someone that you might consider interviewing subsequent. But the offboarding is transference of responsibility and not asking about it. And
right.
So we have them transfer those responsibilities, and then step back and let that person play that role like they would play it. And then the staff sees all that, and by the time we get to our exit, it's a foregone conclusion. Everybody understood what was going to happen. There's no surprise or no culture disruption like there is in a Scaled Outsiders.
That makes total sense. It makes total sense to do it that way, and it's more of a smooth transition. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Byron, this is like a wealth of information. So our listeners are listening right now I'm seeing this podcast and they're asking, how can I get a hold of Byron? How do we get a hold of you?
Yeah. Well, our website is themcfarlandgroup.com. So If we go there, there's a contact Byron link that you can get a hold of me there. Or if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, Byron K. McFarland, I post weekly streamside tips where I'm standing in clear moving water where I was previously casting to feeding trout, and I am inspired to articulate a minute to a minute and a half of thought on my phone and then post it onto LinkedIn, unedited.
Oh, we definitely, everybody right now, go to LinkedIn and follow Byron. Absolutely. Okay, Byron, I have 2 more questions. One of them is, I'm all about processes and procedures. So from your experience, does that affect the business in terms of selling, in terms of transferring, like having the knowledge transfer from the owner, from the key employees? How does that, how would you value that to actually have those processes and procedures well documented?
Well, it influences business value in that it allows for the business to have more predictable results and maybe less reliance on institutional knowledge. So it reduces the risk, which then increases the business value. And then maybe even more importantly is that the existence of the process and documentation of it in a way that you could share with a financial institution would demonstrate to the financial institution creditworthiness. Absolutely. And so having access to financing can be somewhat enhanced by having your business plan, all your processes documented, being able to demonstrate that to that financial institution. No different than, let's say, an outside buyer conducting due diligence on the business, looking for the business's book. You can do the same thing with commercial lenders. Or if you're going to use outside investors to partner, there's an emergence now of the minority angel investor. I've seen more of these now. The minority angel investor is looking for those standard operating procedures that are documented, along with a capable management team, which would then make them feel confident that their investment is safe and be willing to take a minority position, as opposed to a change of control position, which usually turns off management if they can negotiate with an outside investor to have a minority position. That minority position can be secured through agreement, but the minority investor is really looking at 2 things. Is this business operating well? And then are the people that need to be there already running it? So
absolutely. I agree with you 100%. It is very important to have those when you're actually doing a transition, of course, during operations, but also during transition.
yes.
Great. All right. My last question that I always like to ask is, what inspires you? A book, a podcast you like to listen to, a mentor, a quote. What do you feel inspired by?
Well, I've read some books early on in my journey to develop this expertise. And the first book that I read was by John Brown, How to Run Your Business So You Can Leave It in Style. And there's been several editions or versions of that written. And then David Maister is a guru on the professional services firm. And there's two books that I've read that inspired me. One was Strategy and the Fat Smoker. And the second was The Trusted Advisor. And those, the value I received from those books is that it really helped me understand my role as the advisor and how to help people overcome most common challenges, which is gaining or losing weight and quitting smoking. So if you can help people with those two, then you can pretty much help them with other business strategies. So I really like those books. And then in terms of inspiration, I take inspiration from interactions with either the seller who's inspired with the opportunity for the future with their management team, or even more. I think the reason that really got me in this is that I like to help the management team that may not have had an opportunity to become a business owner without someone helping the seller of the business see what's possible in the sale. Because I've experienced that when a business owner goes to their attorney or accountant to say, hey, I'm thinking about selling my business to my management team, the first question they would ask is, do they have any money? And the most common answer to that is, well, I don't know. I don't think so. Well, then somebody's got to help overcome that. And I've not found that those professions are necessarily equipped to take the time necessary to work through that solution and then provide coaching along the way. So those would be the sources of my inspiration.
That's fantastic.
Do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a win-win situation. And you're definitely giving a lot of opportunities to people to become entrepreneurs, which I think it's amazing. So absolutely.
Yeah. Realizing the American dream for entrepreneurs and their stakeholders.
That's exactly right. I love that tagline. That's awesome. That's true. Mm-hmm. Byron, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. I'm sure our listeners learned a lot. I know I did. And I know many of our clients will be able to relate to what you're talking about and definitely take that advice, as well as our listeners, as I said. So thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast.
You're welcome. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.